Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an entitled neighbor claims he owns a large part of my property and builds an illegal swimming pool on my land. I taught him a lesson. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. And the first one starts like this. My wife and I always look forward to our annual trip to our native town back in India. We get to eat flavorful food that makes the food we get back here seem bland, and we get to meet our parents. However, the best part about taking a month-long trip to a faraway country is the fact that we won't have to deal with Derek and his family, who seem hell-bent on making our lives miserable. Derek was our neighbor from the time we moved into our new house 20 years back. He and his wife Carla seemed to be despised by the entire neighborhood, and it did not take long to understand why. It is not uncommon to find their trash bags dumped over our common fence. When asked about it, Derek would always say that they would never dump trash by the fence because it was their fence and they would technically be littering on their own property. This made zero sense to me, but I soon learned that it was pointless arguing with a man that refused to listen. His son Alan was only 11 when we first moved in, so we assumed his arrogant behavior would pass once he attained some maturity, but even after entering his 20s he remains a pain that the entire neighborhood is forced to endure. He is obnoxiously loud and violent, which makes it hard for him to keep a job and be able to move out of his parents' house. His wife was the type of person who would start rumors about the other people who lived on the street for no real reason. My wife often complains to me about how Carla always sits by the porch to judge people. She watches everything like a hawk and never allows people an ounce of privacy. The worst of them all, though, was Derek. He is the kind of man that is extremely short-tempered and thinks he is entitled to everything in the world. He is the reason that the other neighbors were never able to form a community. Every single gathering that took place, he would insert himself into it regardless of whether or not he was invited. He would then proceed to get into a fight which usually turned physical. Eventually, everyone just decided to not have gatherings, however big or small the occasion. This seemed much easier than having to deal with Derek. This year, after our month-long vacation, my wife and I were rather excited to go back home due to the new opportunities that awaited her at her workplace. There was still a slight disappointment in my heart that we would have to go back to living next door to Derek's family, but nothing prepared me for what was waiting back home. We came back to find a giant hole dug up on our front lawn, and a couple of construction workers seemed to be lining the hole with cement. I rushed over immediately to get them to stop, but they said they were instructed by the landowner to finish building a pool within the end of this week. I was shocked at this statement because I was the landowner and I had asked for no such thing. I was not even here for a month, so that was obviously impossible. After probing further, I discovered that they were hired by Derek. He had told them the land was his, so they had been working on it for the past 3 weeks and the pool was close to completion. I was absolutely furious and headed towards Derek's house, but my wife stopped me and told me it was better to go to the police directly. I realized this was smarter because knowing Derek, he was definitely not gonna listen to a single thing I said. When the workers saw that we had the keys that opened our house, they believed that the property was in fact ours and decided to clear out the area till this matter was resolved. They were not too worried about not being paid for their work because the payment had already been completed. This just made me more angry because it showed the confidence with which Derek had decided that our front yard was his. We called the police and informed them of what had happened. Even they were rather shocked as they had never heard of such a case before. The officer on the other end told me he would send a couple of people over to take a look at what was happening and to speak to Derek. Meanwhile, we were advised to consult a lawyer about what could be done. My sister-in-law, Aya, is an amazing lawyer, but I was not very clear on how to explain the situation. This was when Derek came banging at the door. He was mad that the work on the pool had been stopped. I told him how ridiculous it is that he just started constructing a whole pool in front of my house when I was on vacation, but he said the place now belongs to him according to the adverse possession law. He claimed the fence was his, and since it was on my property for over 12 years, the land now belonged to him. He was visibly getting angrier, but the cops had arrived at this point and he was forced to go back to his place and deal with it in court. I rang up Aya and she explained to me that since the property was not exactly unused by us during the 12-year duration, it would be hard for his claim to stand in court. However, there was a risk of him being able to usurp the portion with the pool if he had a really good lawyer. Our best plan of action was suing him to get the pool removed and to get a restraining order. Our lawyer was significantly better than his, so it did not take very long for us to win this case. Derek was infuriated by the fact that he had to pay us after losing, and he made no effort to hide it. The night after the court hearing, he barged into our house with Ellen by breaking the front door. They each had guns and threatened to shoot unless we agreed to let them finish the pool and use it whenever they pleased. My wife was horrified, but she agreed to their conditions if it meant they would leave us alone. They left after this with a satisfied smirk on their faces, but I was astounded that my wife just let them go. She then showed me her phone and the recording of this whole incident. Footage of Derek threatening us and damaging property, combined with violating the restraining order, was enough to get him locked up for a good long time. We dialed the police number immediately and Derek and Ellen were arrested. The whole neighborhood was relieved that they didn't have to deal with Derek anymore. There would be no more unnecessary fights and no need to restrict people from meeting each other. The best part was that I got the pool finished. He had paid the entire construction amount in the beginning, so that meant I just had to let them complete it and then I would have a free pool in my house. We then got to celebrate being rid of Derek by having a pool party that he could not crash considering he was locked up. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I guess that is sort of a tutorial on how to get a free pool from an entitled awful neighbor. Congrats to OP. Anyway, let's continue with the next story. This one is titled Issues with My Weird Neighbor. My husband, 29 male, and I, 28 female, have been living here for 5 years ever since we married. Our previous neighbors were an adorable couple in their 60s to 70s, we had a fairly good relationship and were kind of sad when they left. This year I gave birth to my son, 6-month-old now. When my new neighbors, let's call them Paul and Anna, moved in, I was 2 months pregnant. We were not friends, but we would say hi to each other here and there. I sunbathe every day, it's something I've been doing since childhood. I was a very anemic kid and my mom made me do it to help with my anemia. I don't even know if it works, but it's a habit that helps me start my day. That was not a problem until my pregnancy became apparent. The left side of the yard has 2 kinds of fences, one low, 1.5 meters, that used to have a hedge on the neighbor's side that they cut off, and one taller one, 2 meters, in the rest of the backyard. It's hard to see it from the ground, but they can still see our whole yard and part of our main floor from the 2nd floor. When I was 5 months pregnant, Paul told my husband that my sunbathing was making them uncomfortable. I sunbathed in shorts and tank tops, nothing out of the ordinary, I just ignored them and kept my routine. The following month, he did it again. Until I was 8 months pregnant, I was back from a walk with my husband and Anna was in the front of the house, and once she saw me, she stormed inside and slammed the door. The following day, Paul came to our house and told us that they have fertility problems and seeing me pregnant was making her heavily uncomfortable and I was an insensitive bitch. Currently, I am working from home and the baby is close to me in a playpen in the living room and we have another one in the backyard on the terrace, so I can have him close when gardening or just playing with him. Well, I made his wife uncomfortable again yesterday. I was in the living room playing with the baby when he knocked. He asked me to move from the living room because his wife could see me from their balcony. I told him to tell her to look in the other direction and leave me alone. Today, my husband and I were grilling some meat in the backyard. The baby was hungry, so I started to breastfeed. When I looked at their house, Anna was on the balcony. She went in and a few minutes later, Paul was at our door again. I gave my son to my husband and I answered the door. Paul went off on me for breastfeeding in public, again my fenced-in yard, and being inconsiderate. When he finished, I told him to leave us alone, don't knock on my door again, and if his wife is so upset over seeing a baby, she needs therapy and not him harassing my family. And I will do everything I want in my own home. At the time, I felt justified, but I was venting with my mom and she told me I was wrong. And that I could not understand because I never suffered from infertility and I need to apologize. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would love to hear what you think about this story. Do you think that OP is the a-hole or not? Edit, I sat down with my husband to talk about the precautions. I was so annoyed that I was not thinking about the risks. We'll be installing cameras and a taller fence. Unfortunately, their vision from the balcony will stay the same because the city won't let us build taller than 4 meters. But this will help anyway. I called my dad to get some help with the fence and he ended up talking to my mom. She called and apologized. She suffered from infertility and postpartum depression. When I spoke to her, she felt Anna's pain, but she also remembered some crazy things she did during this period and gave me some extra precautions to take. About the restraining order, we called our lawyer and he told us to get few footages because until now we only have our word and our other neighbor's testimony. And if he shows up again to record it and to call the cops, if he came to my house 5 times to call the cops each time. But still, will be hard to get one. And now some users in the comments said, not the a-hole, this is not your problem, it sucks for them, but are you really gonna stop being a mom at certain viewpoints because they cannot have a baby? She needs to stop looking at your home, that's it, and that's all. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, document everything and fill a restraining order if this behavior continues. This is harassment, you are not being inconsiderate for living your life. The world does not stop spinning because this couple cannot have a baby. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would agree, as sad as it is for the other couple, but they cannot dictate others what to do, especially when it is basic things like taking care of a baby. That's just ridiculous. Anyway, the next one is titled, Neighbors' Kids Are a Real Problem. My grandparents owned the lot next to their house, they just used it for more yard space. But when my sister and I were born, Grandpa knocked down the old shed on the empty lot and built a playground for us. Everything was made with his own 2 hands, it was a kid's dream and we both played there any chance we got. And after we grew up, they let the kids of their neighborhood use the place to play with no issues, but then some years later they passed and the house went to my mom. I found out I am expecting, so my husband Andre and I started seriously looking for a house when we had only been half trying before. Mom suggested we buy my grandparents' house since we know it's a good place and us buying it would keep it in the family. It is still in good shape, has no HOA and is close to a good school. So we bought it for a steal and moved in ASAP. Right away we noticed parents hanging out at the playground with their kids. We did not mind at first and used the chance to introduce ourselves. Everyone was lovely and younger than I had expected, but it seems a bunch of couples with kids had taken over the street in the past 5 or so years. The problem arose when neighbor witch NW brought her kid over one afternoon. I happened to be by the window and saw a flash of red outside. It was a kid in a red shirt literally standing on the roof of one of the 2-story playhouses, almost 10 feet off the ground. I ran outside thinking he was alone and said he needed to get down right now. That is when NW stormed over from who knows where and yelled at me to F off and not tell her kid anything. I asked if she was his mom and after getting a yes, I asked her to make her son get down before he got hurt. She argued saying I couldn't make them do anything, so I told her this was my property and yes, I could. That is when the kid fell and thankfully once he was halfway down and only onto the grass, but he still wailed like he was dying. He was fine. He then got up without issues and ran over to NW. She picked him up and said if he had been hurt she would have sued me, so I threatened her with the cops if she didn't leave. She flipped me off and called me a gin jockey, random AF, I don't drink at all, let alone gin, but left. Andre was worried other people might try to sue us if their kids got hurt on our land. I had not even thought of that, so we put up a fence. Parents came by asking why the fence, so I told them why, and they can thank NW. I heard she has been shunned by the other parents and none of them will let their kids play with hers. I feel guilty that her son is getting punished for her actions. Maybe just saying we wanted a fence up instead of telling them about NW would have been kinder. So Reddit, am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would love to hear from you. Do you think that OP is the a-hole for this or not? Let us know in the comments. And someone in the audience said, not the a-hole, it's your right to protect yourself from harm. If any child gets hurt on your property, the parents can sue the pants off of you. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. You did what was necessary to protect your property from lawsuits and you told the truth about why you put up the fence. It's a shame that her child is getting shunned, but it is not the first time that a kid has suffered for the actions of an idiotic parent, and it won't be the last. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would agree, better be safe than sorry, and don't let random strangers on your property, especially if there is a good chance that they might get hurt. The next one is titled, Insult Me and Rip Me Off? It will cost you in the long run. A couple of decades ago, in the mid-80s, I occasionally needed to get bodywork done on my car, since a kid in the lane to my right tried to turn left without looking and took it into a large and supposedly well-regarded body shop for repairs. In hindsight, I should have known it wouldn't turn out well when they refused to give me a quote without seeing my insurance estimate first. To keep this short, suffice to say that they screwed it up. I got charged for undercoating that wasn't applied, got cheap non-OEM replacement parts, ignored instructions to replace the fender, was okayed by the insurance company, and slathered a couple of pounds of Bondo on it instead, doing a miserable job of matching the contours and a myriad other screw-ups. Within a week of getting the car back from them, I had returned with a long list of problems, quality complaints and omissions. The general manager, found later he was the owner's nephew and had a reputation for being an a-hole, basically blew me off with a combination of indifference and rudeness. As to the quality complaints, he said, "Look, this car is not worth putting Cadillac level work into it. You want it done better, you will have to pay us more money." I then did what most pissed off customers do, I badmouthed the company to anyone who would listen. Anytime I saw any car in need of bodywork, I would warn the owner against this body shop, making my case by showing them the poor work done on my car. I continued doing this for at least 4 years, until I finally sold the car. The real revenge part was that about every 4 to 6 months I would call the shop and ask to speak to the GM, and when I got him on the phone, I would identify myself as a PO'd former customer and tell him that I had saved a dozen or so people from his company's shoddy work, and I had probably cost his shop about $10,000 or thereabouts. The first 2 calls he blew off. By the 4th call he was getting worried and wanted my name and for me to come in so that we could come to an agreement and get you satisfied. I told him he had already blown his one chance to make good by insulting me when I came back to get them to do the job right. As to my name, I told him he could easily find it by going over his list of customers who had come back with complaints about the work they had done. I continued the calls even after I had sold the car for about 6 years or so. Towards the end of that time, I would point out to him that his attitude had potentially cost his company over $100,000 worth of work. On my last call, I actually got the owner, the nephew was on vacation, and spent a good 15 minutes on the phone with him, explaining why I had made it a 6-year mission to cost them as much business as I possibly could, and that his jerk of a GM had blown any chance of ever getting me to quit badmouthing them. I later heard from friends at a wrecking yard in the same town that the body shop had a new GM. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that was not just a normal revenge, but there should be a subreddit for some kind of long-term revenge. I know that there is r/escalating revenge, but this one goes even further if you ask me. However, I would love to hear from you. Do you think that the body shop deserved OP's 6-year revenge, or do you think that OP went too far? Please let us know in the comments. The next one is titled, "Don't do unauthorized surgeries on your patients and don't treat your employees like crap. It will cost you." My mom has been a nurse for almost a decade now. 8 of those years she worked at the same hospital on one of the most busy floors to work on, until she finally had enough of the piss-poor management. Before she left though, she exacted an amazing feat of revenge that got the hospital into a lot of trouble. As I said, Mom worked on what was probably the busiest floor in the whole hospital. This particular floor is severely understaffed and many times there were only 3 or 4 nurses working, each one having to care for 10 or 11 patients each, and sometimes even more. Lots of times it would be pretty much impossible to get everything done in a 12-hour shift when you have to pass meds, tend to, and chart for that many patients. My mom is a great nurse. She is extremely smart, a hard worker, and she really does love her job. Usually she would be the first nurse to get done with all of her work and then help other nurses with their workload so everyone could leave on time. Her co-workers there loved her like no one's business. This kind of work ethic landed her a position as a charge nurse. As a charge nurse, it was her job to see to it that all or most of the paperwork is done properly and faxed, that nurses were getting their charts in on time and passing meds when need be. It was her job to interact with the doctors and fill orders and direct in case of an emergency. Now, at this particular hospital there are a lot of residents who are fresh from med school and have very little experience in a real hospital setting. Sometimes they would give orders that were unnecessary or not the best solution for the health of a patient. Mom, being so respected, would oftentimes coax the doctors into changing their orders to something more suitable, as she has a lot of real work experience. But then some doctors would disagree and tell the nurses to go on ahead with his instruction. Then when something goes wrong, the blame would go on Mom, and there was really nothing she could do about it. She finally had enough when a doctor ordered a heart catheter on a patient who was extremely drunk and in no state of mind to make decisions for himself. My mom tried everything to get the doctor to not go through with it because the man really did not need to have a heart catheter at all. This doctor was all the time ordering ridiculous treatments for patients because that is how he makes his money. He convinces this drunk man to sign the surgery papers and sends him to OR, where he was basically receiving an unauthorized surgery, seeing as his decision-making was impaired. After that, my mom decided to start applying for jobs at other hospitals because she couldn't stand to see any more patients being abused and mistreated by the place that is supposed to have their health in best interest. When she finally landed another RN position, she gave her notice and worked to the end of her term. After she received her last check, they tried to tell her that she was overpaid and she would have to pay back some of the money. Obviously she didn't do that and was appalled at the way they were treating her after 8+ years of loyalty to this hospital. So she started plotting her revenge. Before quitting, she contacted JCAHO, the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations, and told them about the unauthorized surgery. This is a big no-no. It is something that can make a hospital lose their accreditation and be closed down permanently. She gave them the name of the patient, the file number, the case number, the name of the doctor, and the name of all other parties involved in the surgery. She was very thorough. The day after she quit, a close friend of hers that worked the same floor said that a GCAHO rep came and did some investigating almost entirely unannounced. They do warn the hospital before they come, but never give them enough of a notice to change anything beforehand. About a week after their initial investigation, 1 or 2 people had gone and interviewed staff and looked at medical records. They came back again. This time they came with a lot of people. They pulled every single file to review and see if any other sketchy practices had been performed under the radar. For every breach of HIPAA and OSHA protocol, they were fined thousands of dollars. The doctor and all staff involved in the cardiac catheter incident were fired, and the doctor lost his license and can never get it back. They threatened to close the hospital if the fines were not paid, which added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Of course, the family of the man who found out about the surgery sued the hospital. Spoiler, he won and had to pay him off too. To this day, JCAHO visits the hospital frequently to make sure no more unethical practices happen again. Don't treat your nurses like crap and don't treat your patients like crap, or it will come back and bite you in the butt. And ripe stars in other stories we often say never mess with a farmer, but in this case I would also add never mess with a nurse. If you would like to see more revenge stories from nurses, then please let me know in the comments, because I'm sure I can find a few more interesting stories.